Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me. This is going to be probably an abbreviated talk, so I want to make sure that everybody understands that you can ask me questions in the chat area and I'll get to them. I have a series of questions already set up, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk about careers and answer some of the Q&As that I get all the time. All right, so I want to start off though by introducing myself and letting you know who I am and my background so you can make the decision as to whether or not I'm full of crap or this is actually worthwhile. So let's go ahead and bring up my slide about me. And if you encounter any issues with the audio or not whatnot, please just let me know. And other than that, let's just go ahead and plow through it. So, all right, so about me. So I joined the Army back in 1990. And one of the things that I did was I was a signals intelligence analyst, a cryptanalyst, and a Russian linguist. So the whole concept behind that was, basically I was trained to spy and listen in on secrets and everything. And that's really where I got my experience as an offensive security expert in some form or fashion, right? But if you go back to the 1980s, that's when I actually started getting into more computer kind of hacking, and that was a really fun time. Everybody was brand new to the idea of computers and what they could do, and so it was kind of a Wild West thing, and it was really a lot of fun. But from the 80s to the 90s, the 90s is when I got into the military, and I spent 8 years in the military doing, like I said, cryptanalyst, signals intelligence analyst stuff. When I got out, I continued to be kind of a subject matter expert on, in this case, information security, network security, and then I built up my career around that. Eventually, I got into pen testing, and I've been doing professional pen testing pretty much since 2005. I believe so, almost 20 years on that. But for information security, it's been 3 decades or 3 decades. And so then I've spoken at a lot of different conferences as well, DEF CON, HOPE, et cetera. So it's been an interesting experience being able to talk to a lot of people, meet a lot of people, and then share some of the security ideas. And it's during that time that I got a lot of questions about whether or not the people could move into the career, what it took to get into the career, things like that. And so over the years, I've accumulated some of the questions that we're going to talk about here. I want to tell you too that I was a practice director for a few years. That was a hiring position too. So I did a lot of looking at a lot of resumes, understanding a lot of people's goals and objectives, and understanding what their real skill set were. And then I'll talk about that here in a minute too. But I also got some certifications. You'll notice that, so it's got ISC squared. I did the ISSMP, the CISSP. Got a couple AWS certificates as well, one in security. Cisco, also a couple, one in security. And then Salaries, I've got multiple also in security. So, and then I've also written numerous books. You can see it on the, that way. You can see all the books that I've done and magazine articles as well. So I've been in this field for a while. I've contributed a lot to the industry. I've been on the side of hiring, so I have a pretty good understanding of what companies look for when they're bringing on people. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about the first question that I typically get, and that is, how is it possible to go from my particular job into information security, specifically pen testing? I get that question a lot because there's a lot of people who have gotten kind of bored, or they're excited about hacking and they want to move out of what they're currently doing into another profession. And it's totally possible. There is a thing we kind of talk about in the hacker world about having a hacker mind. And as long as you have that hacker mind, the one that it's kind of like trying to figure out what the answers to the puzzles are, being able to do keep digging in to see how things work, and then also not give up on that, and also look at things from a unique perspective, almost a malicious perspective. I don't want to say that I'm not encouraging anybody to go out and do any sort of malicious hacking, but you got to have that mindset where perhaps how would the bad people do this? How would somebody overcome these security controls that somebody has? And so those are the kind of things that you would want to have built up into your mind, that kind of mentality, in order to be successful in this field. If you're very logical and you're rigid in the way you do things, and you don't like any sort of deviation from that, hacking field may or may not be the right place to do it, despite some of the coolness, that cool factor that a lot of people think we have here as professional pen testers. But really, the best advice that I can give is find out what you want to do. If hacking is the thing you want to do and you're obsessed with it, then that's probably the right thing to do. There will be some concerns about salary, and I'll talk about that here in a minute, but it is possible to move from one career field into another. In fact, I break it down into the 3 different areas. So there's usually people who write code, there's people who do system administration, and then there's people who do like network security, so network people. And so for people who do code writing, typically they grow into the hacking field into things like web application or code review and Internet of Things and stuff like that. So there's definitely a distinct path for people who are professional code writers to move into the hacking field. If you're a system administrator, network administrator, there is obviously a path career for that. Internal pen testing, that's the area that I focus on, is the network pen testing. I have an understanding of all the different areas, but that's where my love is. So is that network side. And then, but that's how I grew up, with system administration, and that got me into understanding how to hack systems and things like that. And then, but again, part of my network background is network experience. And it's kind of rare to see people from a network background move into the pen testing field, because network security people tend to make a lot more money than they would necessarily by moving over into the pen testing field. But like I said, we'll get into the salary conversation here in a minute. So yes, so the answer is absolutely yes, you can do that. Yes, you need to develop that hacker mind, and the best way to do that is to do a lot of things like VulnHub, basically exploit servers, vulnerable servers that are specifically designed for a pen testing lab. Okay, so there's that. So the next question that I get a lot of time is, what type of education do I actually need? This is going to be one of those kind of controversial questions, and I'll say it this way, is that the true answer is you don't need any education. What you need is a skill set. And I know some of the best people I've ever worked around, and they're principals, right? Principal pen testers. They have no college experience at all, none, zero. And so the question then becomes, well, how did they get a job, right? And it's because they demonstrated their ability and their knowledge, right? So that's the real key, is that you can get into this field with no educational background. Like, you don't have to have a bachelor's degree, you don't have to have a master's degree, and you can still get into this field, but you have to be able to demonstrate your ability to do those things. The good news is that happens anyway during an interview, if you get to the phase where they're willing to put you through a test, because pretty much every organization I've worked for, they have a little test that you have to go through, a pen test, right? They create their own vulnerable system. You go in, you hack it, you provide a report, and then they make a decision based on your performance on that test as to whether they're going to bring you in and again at what level. And so that's the very bare bones of it. You don't need an education. But here's the but. When I first started back in the 90s and 2000, got my job in the early 2000s, is that there just wasn't many of us, right? And so if the fact that I even knew what an Nmap scan was and that I understood some of the vulnerabilities and exploits and stuff, which I learned, in the 90s and in the 80s, because I knew that people were interested in talking to me and having me come on board, and that's how I got my first pen test gig, was from an internal transfer within a company, because I did understand all that stuff, and I could talk it and I could demonstrate my skill set, but that's all I really needed to do. There was just not that many people that had the skills to do the pen testing. And so it was kind of easier to get into the field. Nowadays, my God, you go look at the like Indeed, and even for beginning pen testers, they often say they need a bachelor's degree, and they need all these certifications and everything like that. I consider those leaders for HR, and so for larger organizations, they're going to get 10, 20, 100 resumes. And at that point, if they only have 5 or 10 positions open, if they're on a grand hiring frenzy, then those 5 or 10 slots, you have a lot of competition for. And so you need some way to filter out. And a lot of HR organizations will say, well, we'll just work from the top down and say, if this guy's got a master's degree, then we'll talk to him first. If this guy's got a bachelor's degree, we'll talk to him in the bottom half. And if there's no education and we haven't hired anybody at this point, then we'll go find somebody that doesn't have a degree. The other thing too is certifications. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But yeah, so right now it's a lot more difficult because a lot of companies can filter on what education you have, and basically the higher education, the more education you have, the higher on that pile that as they sift through. But that doesn't mean that you still can't get a job, and you can still get a job, especially with companies that are smaller. Again, you need to be able to demonstrate your skill set, and there's a few ways to do that, and I'll talk about that a little bit on how. There's another question about how do I get hired as a new pen tester. But I'll talk about that, some of the tricks that you can use. But again, the education, if you want to talk about HR, they require certain things, especially for larger organizations. But the truth is, like I said, I've seen amazing skill from people that don't have a college degree, and that's perfectly fine. I would hire them in a heartbeat if I could. So yeah, so there's that. So let me check. I'll apologize. I'm running solo, so I'm having to do all the stuff that I'm looking at, the chat, making sure that we have things running correctly. So let me just make sure that everything is going okay. And yeah, so let's continue. The next question I have, like I said, I'm going to kind of burn through these fairly quickly, but if you have any questions, again, just drop them down there, and I'll get to them. Certifications. So let's talk about certifications. All right. When I mention hacker certifications, or what kind of certifications does a hacker need, these are typically the ones that people think of. They think of the offensive security. They think of certified ethical hacker, the Security Plus, GPEN, or GIAC, any of the courses, right? That's usually what comes to mind when people say, what kind of certifications do I need in order to get a job? And I'll say it this way. If that's what you're thinking about, you're going about it wrong. And the reason why I say that is because when we send a pen tester as a company, we have a bunch of pen testers that we assign to a project. And the customer, when we send that resume over, or we talk about an individual in particular, they don't want to know if they've got an OSCP. They don't want to know if they've got something from GIAC. That's not what they care about. What they care about is their environment. and the systems and operating systems in their environment and their architecture, right? And so what I would actually suggest is these are the wrong things to look at. What you need to be focused on as a pen tester is certifications like AWS, like the ones that I initially got, or I showed you on that first slide. So if you're interested in doing cloud penetration testing, get some cloud certifications, whether it's Azure, AWS, whatever, Google. You need certifications in those to prove that you understand that architecture for that environment, cloud. I understand cloud. I understand how it works. I understand what the security measures are, what the tools that should be employed in an environment from a security perspective. And then also as a pen tester, I need to know what those vulnerabilities are. OSCP, GIAC, all those are great. We can talk about their value at some other point, but the reality is that they test you on a very generalized understanding. Even like the GPen or the cloud one for GIAC, it's still very broad on what they test against and what they teach you, because they want you to understand from the pen testing perspective, these are the kind of things that you should be looking for. But if you don't know the architecture intimately and you don't understand how the different tools in, let's say, a cloud environment work, when you talk to the customer and you can't speak their language, they're going to question your ability to actually perform the pen test. You could be the best pen tester out there, but if you can't convince your customer that you understand their environment, they're going to be concerned and they're going to be very cautious about what you do and how you do it. Another example is I've got Cisco certs. I'm intimately familiar with the architecture, the security designs behind the different switches and routers and the best way to implement those. So I get oftentimes put on those engagements that include network devices, so internals and stuff like that. That allows me to talk to their engineers at a level that they expect from a professional pen tester. And it also allows me to convey that information to the upper management when the final report comes out to explain what some of their vulnerabilities are. That's the other key too, is that there's a vernacular, there's a language. There's a language with Cisco, there's a language with AWS, there's a language with Salaries, there's a language in all of these different areas. And if you don't speak their language, then you can't communicate what is necessary to be fixed and how to fix it. That's the last component, is you should also know how to fix these things. And if you don't have that skill set and you don't have that knowledge and you haven't really studied up on those ancillary architectures and protocols and everything like that, the customer is not going to really trust your final result. So these are fine. By all means, if you want to use these for resume fodder, go for it. But I strongly encourage you to become a subject matter expert in one of those areas that you're most interested in and get the training in that area to demonstrate to your customers and to yourself that you understand what those vulnerabilities are and how to fix them and how to look for them. So, all right, so that's that. So certifications, great. Get them, get the right ones. Let me check on any questions. Best piece of advice you ever get in relation to pen testing or overall in your career? So the one that I like I'll turn this off real quick. So that question is a very good question. I'll read it again. It's basically asking what's the best advice I've ever gotten. And it was to become a subject matter expert in something, right? One of the things that I thought of initially when I was getting into this is you kind of need to be a jack of all trades, and that's very helpful. Being able to understand, like, I can do web application pen testing, I can do API testing, I can do cloud penetration testing, I've done red teaming, I've done physical pen testing, I can do all those things. But if I try to spread myself across all of those, I'm good, but I'm not great. So I've picked an area, specifically internal network pen testing, cloud penetration testing, which is kind of a hybrid, but I've become that subject matter expert in those areas. And so when the customers that are either harder to please or have a massive problem and a very complex architecture comes in and says, hey, we have this need, then I can get put on those as a pen tester, or as a director, I would assign those subject matter experts in those areas. So for example, I have had a principal who was a subject matter expert in cloud. Amazing guy. Would I put him on a web pen test? I could. Would he be the best choice for that? It depends who was available, right? But there are other people that are much better at web application pen testing than at cloud, right? And so as you grow into this field, you will find yourself gravitating towards one area. And so the advice is become that subject matter expert, become that guru. That was the phrase. Be a guru. And then at that point, the world is your oyster. So yeah, that's the best advice that I got. Be a guru in something. It's fine to be jack of all trades, but focus on something and become the guru. Become an industry expert in that. So that's probably my best advice that I've gotten. Okay. Again, any more questions? I'm happy to answer them. So let's talk about how do we get hired as a new pen tester. So I need a quick wet the whistle. So this kind of coincides with the very first question is, can you switch careers into pen testing? But I'm going to approach this as you're brand new, right? You have no experience. You just got out of high school, or you just got out of college in a field that has nothing to do with information security or penetration testing. And you want to become a pen tester because it is cool, and it is cool. But how do you do it, right? And so the thing that I would probably talk about first is making sure you have the skills necessary, right? And it goes back to one of the videos that I did is you got to set up your lab and you got to start hacking against some of the vulnerable systems that are out there. So go to VulnHub, go check the playlist. You'll find the videos. Anyway, the idea is you need to practice. You need to figure out if you're good at something and what area you enjoy more. So my suggestion is go and start doing tests, create a lab, set up Kali in a virtual lab, set up a virtual box that has a vulnerable server from VulnHub, and start hacking and start trying them. Go through the walkthroughs, use them. By all means, use them. Just to get through and get comfortable doing this. You don't want to beat your head up. I talk about getting a cheater's mentality. Going a little off track. When I was a professor, I used to tell my students, it's okay at the beginning to have a cheater's mentality. Basically, it's okay to follow walkthroughs and just learn how to do things without having to beat your head against the wall, because you're not expected to understand how to hack all this stuff, right? And so just start walking through it, get familiar with it, get familiar with the tools, get familiar with the concepts, some of the language. And then as you start developing your skills, little at a time, find out, do you really like the web stuff? Do you really like the network stuff? Is the cloud stuff more interesting? And then start drilling into that area. And then if you want to prove yourself, you can go get something like the OSCP, right? But I'll say again that that's really just kind of like resume fodder, the OSCP, or the GIACs, or CEH. People will still ask you to prove it. Even if you have an OSCP, they're still going to run you through a pen test on their own system and then expect you to do a report. Reporting is important. And so the other thing that I always bring up is that certification and that skill set isn't enough, especially now. Back in the day, back in 2001, you could probably get away with it, but today they expect more. They actually expect you to demonstrate, not just with a cert and not just on the pen test that they give you, but they expect something more. So they'll look at blog posts. They'll look at if you have any code that you've written. So your own GitHub repository, they'll want to take a look at that. They'll want to know if you've done anything in the community. Do you do any talks like at the local conferences? There's a bunch of B-sides now that are opening up across the United States. I don't even know if they're global, but they just had one here in Colorado Springs, first time ever. So, are you talking at those areas? Are you a subject matter expert? They want to see what else you've done. In addition, I recommend this for anybody that has no experience but has the skills. So that, let's say they've already gone through a lot of the Vuln hubs, they got an OSCP, they know their stuff, right? Go do some bug bounties. Start working on those. Put that in your resume. Do that for a year. Do that for 2 years. Do that for 6 months. I don't care. But do it. If you get any hits, make sure you put that in there, that you were successful and what areas of expertise you're in. That's actually now real world experience, real business, real job related experience is doing bug bounties. So by all means do that. That's an easy one to prove that you know what you're doing, especially if you can get any bounties off of that. And truth be told is that in some cases, if you really focus on it, you make a really good living off of bug bounties. But I digress a little bit. As a brand new pen tester, you need to have the skills, you need to demonstrate the skills, and you need to do things in the industry and in the community that prove that you know what you're doing. And again, it's either GitHub, create tools and push it out to the community, participate in maybe some open source projects and help with that, do talks, things like that, right? Educate. For me, I already had the position, already had the job, but doing magazine articles and doing books was definitely a path that was very successful for me. But I couldn't do any of that. I couldn't do the books and I couldn't do the magazine articles until I did the conferences, right? And so I actually attended and spoke at a couple DEF CON conferences before I even got an offer to do an article or to do a book. So again, that was giving back to the community and letting them know that I knew more than just the average person or something like that. Okay, hopefully that answered some questions. What's the best piece of advice you ever got in relation to? Okay, I hear many content creators say that cloud security is becoming a more sought after skill and will continue to grow exponentially. Would you agree with this? And what are your thoughts about this? Absolutely. I haven't seen, so when I first got into it, it was network pen testing. That was pretty much the only real option, right? You'd hack systems either externally or internally, and really even externally, a lot of the times when we broke into systems, it was because they would do things like leave a database port open to the internet, or FTP, or SSH with really bad passwords and stuff. So a lot of it wasn't even web-based. And I would say in 2010, 29, 28, something like that. I started seeing a lot more applications hitting that were obviously poor design, and then obviously they were hacked, and then people became concerned. And so in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a lot more interest in web application hacking. And I would say that the biggest demand right now is for application pen testers, but there's a lot of them now. There's a ton of application pen testers. When I 10, 15 years ago, there weren't that many. There was a desperate need for them. And so I saw what it was at the beginning. You got this network that is exposed. You need hackers for that, right? And then we start getting a lot of those, and all of a sudden, holy crap, our applications suck, and we're getting hacked, and all our data is getting released on our web servers. So we need people to take a look at our web applications and do code reviews. How do you program securely? We have no idea, that kind of stuff, right? Now it's like that all over again. And people are saying, well, we moved to the cloud and we just assumed that by turning on all the bells and whistles that we were safe. But we just got one of our buckets hacked. And how did that even happen, right? I thought we had that stuff turned off. Well, was it legacy? Was it newer? What, all that stuff. They don't know. And they don't have the skills behind the scenes to do that. When the last job I was at, when we were doing, we just started up our own cloud penetration testing practice. Every engagement, we found criticals, every single one. And so it's like the Wild West all over again. It's actually really exciting. And so I would say, absolutely, if you want to be cutting edge and you want to be in high demand and you want to get some solid salaries, bone up seriously on cloud pen testing. Right now, AWS is the largest. It has the biggest demand, so definitely start with that one. Azure, don't neglect that, because a lot of people are starting to move into the Azure, the Microsoft cloud environment, because they're familiar with it, but they're not. That's the funny thing is, they think that it's easy to configure the web, that it would be basically you just take your regular IT people, throw them on it, and they'd be able to configure it correctly and figure out how to do it. It's a completely different skill set. And so there's a lot of vulnerabilities that are out there that are just waiting to be found by either malicious people or hopefully by professional pen testers that are out there to support the customer. So yeah, definitely look into cloud. Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be the way to go for the next 15 years, easy. High demand. I think it's going to outpace any of your application pen tester demands and stuff like that. So definitely, it's also more arduous. I'm going to say that. We talked about kind of being a jack of all trades. You have to understand that you can't just take a network guy and put him in a cloud environment and test. He's going to run Nessus scans, and that's kind of dumb. But you gotta understand how everything communicates. All communicates through APIs now on the cloud, and so you have to understand what that means and what are those vulnerabilities and how they communicate in the cloud, and what who's responsible for what, right? It's a mutually shared responsibility between the owner and AWS. They have a certain layer that they're responsible for, and they secure that. Everything above that is owned by the customer, and they need to take care of it. They don't necessarily know. So now you're no longer just thinking about your web application. You're thinking about how does that web app how is it deployed? Is it in like using like a Docker system, or is it on a server? And there's a bunch of different types of threats depending on how you deploy that. So the old network architecture is going away, mostly going away, and the cloud architecture is taking over, and people just don't understand how to secure it. So yeah, definitely do that. Next question, somebody says, are there any expectations you've had in your career that turned out to be different than reality. Reporting. So I'll talk about this here in a minute. I have a question about what's the difference between an in-house and a consultant pen tester. When I started this, I was in-house, and we would do reports, but it was not as important. Oftentimes, just a conversation with the customer, which was an internal customer, business unit or whatever. But I'll talk about it really quick. But reporting is so critical for consultants because that's what we get paid for. We don't get paid for the hacking. We get paid for that piece of paper, that document, the virtual piece of paper that we hand to them, that PDF that says, here's what we found, here's how we found it, so they can replicate it, and here's how you need to fix it. And then we give that to the managers, and then they have to better understand what their obligations are and make that managerial decision. And along with reporting is communication. Communication, I would say, is even more important than report writing. And I've had a lot of escalations as a director because of poor communication. I would say probably more than anything else. Not because somebody pushed over a server, brought it down by hacking it. I've had escalations with customers because they didn't feel like they were being communicated to correctly. So that is a big deal. I know that growing up in the industry, being a system administrator, network administrator, you can be isolated. You don't have to talk to people. If you're not a people person, don't be a consultant because, just stick with, internal security or, system network, whatever application, because you have to talk a lot to people and you have to convince them as to why it's a vulnerability, and you'll have a lot of people argue, or engineers will get on and say, well, I don't believe it's a critical, it should just be a medium. And then so now you got to step them through and you got to communicate, convince them correctly without obviously being derogatory. You're the subject matter expert, but it's still their systems and it's their egos that are getting bruised legitimately. I don't want to slam that, right? They have an investment in what they've done, and oftentimes people take it incorrectly that we're demonstrating their inability to perform. That's not what we're doing. We're just identifying those areas that they missed. So they'll be defensive. Managers will be defensive because then they got to spend money in order to fix these things. And so it becomes very critical as a consultant to communicate with them correctly and in a way that moves the conversation and the progress forward. You don't want them shutting down and keeping their vulnerabilities exposed. So reporting and communication, way understated in any conversation I've ever had about what it's like to be a pen tester. So that would be the one. Okay. I thought it'd be a lot easier. I didn't think I'd have to talk to people. I don't like to talk to people. Yet here I am talking to people. So it's part of the job, right? So, okay. Let's see. Where we stop? Okay, got that one. Realistic salaries. Okay, so this is going to be fun. So I talked about switching careers, and there might be a possibility as to why you don't want to switch careers into a pen testing field, and that's often comes down to salary. And the reason why I say that is if you are a subject matter expert in Active Directory, right? And then you say, I'm going to be a hacker, you may take a 25 to 50% pay cut. No joke. Let me bring up a stat. I'll talk about this in greater detail. And I'll just basically say, take everything you see about salaries with a grain of salt. There's some truths and there's some lies. So this is information from ZipRecruiter. And if you look at it, the low end is 50,000. The high end is 163, but it says 122,000, 129 is in the 75th percentile. Anything above that are outliers. That's not true. That is so not true. I've seen salaries. I'm not disclosing anybody's salaries, right? But I've seen salaries on the high end internally around 250 a year. I've seen them higher outside of organizations that I've worked for. I would say that your Fortune 100 companies pay better. That's where I've seen some of the higher salaries. And I also know there was a Google leak that just happened a month or 3 ago or something like that. And it's something like the top performer. Now, obviously, there's only going to be one of them or maybe two of them made like 700,000 a year, 750 a year. And as an engineer, obviously those are the outliers, right? But there are people getting paid 300, 400,000 a year plus benefits at Google doing exactly the same thing that I've been doing, right? But those are hard to get, and people burn out quickly, and it's a situation where you have to decide what you're comfortable with, right? A lot of those people, I know some people, I don't know anybody at Google, but I know some people that, again, are at Fortune 100 companies that are bringing in $300,000+ a year, that have done that because they've been in that same company for 20 years and they've worked on their resumes, they've done their certifications, they've done their training, they've laser focused on a particular skill set in a particular industry, right? Let's talk about printers, right? People know the printers at HP like nobody's business, right? Down to, they know the details about their chips. They know everything about it, right? Those are the guys that are going to be making $300,000+ a year. So it is you really have to be dedicated to get to that point. But it's possible, right? So if you're looking at your entire career path, you could very well make $200,000 or more in a year. It's not unheard of. It's not out of the norm. I would say if you are dedicating and you're working hard, you're becoming a subject matter expert, not just for your company, but for the industry, $200,000, totally doable. And more if, depending on, if you go freelance or things like that. So the high-end salary, easily higher than this 129,000 that they say. But let's talk about the buts. That $50,000, $50,500 is pretty reasonable for somebody who has no experience. They may have OSCP, they may be able to demonstrate their knowledge. You may be able to show that they create tools and that they know what they're doing. And but understand that when you have no experience, especially in consulting, there's a whole different skill set to that. You're more of a liability than you are an advantage. And the reason why I say that is because there is multiple layers to being a consultant and a security engineer. And it's not just being able to hack, it's being able to communicate, it's being able to report. It's also being able to communicate at multiple levels. Engineers, managers, they have different vernacular, they have different ways of communicating. You need to be comfortable with all of that. And usually when you're beginning, the company that you're working for has to assign you somebody else to watch over you and help manage the project, and make sure that for the next few years that you know what you're doing and you can handle things on your own. So think of that, you've got your salary, but to do this job, but they still have to take a piece of somebody else's salary and stack it on top to make sure you're doing your job, right? So your liability in that perspective is that they require 1.25 people. You're one, and they require some other time from somebody else to come on. And then also when you're brand new, you make mistakes, and you make mistakes in reporting, and you make mistakes in collecting the data. And so there's oftentimes additional work that needs to be done by you going back and doing fixing some things that you forgot to do in the pen test, or in your report, there's some things that you need to repair, or some things that are just plain wrong, and questions about why didn't you do this, why didn't you do that. So there's a lot of time spent on the errors that you will make. Everybody makes them. Everybody has to go through this process. And so it doesn't make sense for a company to throw 6 figures at you. That's what we always hear is, I've got the OSCP, I should be able to make 6 figures. No, you shouldn't, because there's a liability that the company has to assume, and errors that they're going to have to fix, and supervisors that are going to have to look over your work, and editors that excuse me, editors that have to come back and fix your problems, or make you fix them, point out your errors, things like that. Somebody to communicate for you to the customer, et cetera, et cetera. Let me get another drink real quick. So if you come in as a subject matter expert in one area, let's say, again, Active Directory, and you move into the pen testing field, you may be able to get a little bit of a boost over that 50,000, 60,000, depending on where you're at, minimum payment, because you have a skill set that is worth something to another customer. But again, you still have all that, all those shortcomings as a consultant that the customer or that the company has to overcome. And so they won't necessarily bump up your salary much off of that $50,000, $60,000 bottom line. But if you're only making 35 and you are working as, I don't know, in a SOC, and you're making 35,000 a year, and you're boning up on pen testing, this can still be an increase in your salary, and so it's totally worth it. Just be ready to spend the time working up. I will say too, I'll go back to what I said earlier, is that if you go to a smaller shop, they're not going to pay you as much. You go to like a Fortune 100 company with more competition, they'll pay you a little bit more, and they'll have better incentives and better healthcare and all that other stuff. So, yeah, so those are, I would say, realistic salaries. If you're brand new, 50, 60, be happy. I think that's appropriate, even if you have skills in other areas. But I think that what they say here is what the national average is and what you can cap out on, totally wrong. It's a lot larger than that. But you have to work through it. You have to go from a junior to, a veteran to a senior to a principal. And you got to prove yourself all along the way, and keep expanding your skills and becoming that subject matter expert for not only your company, but for the industry. So, all right, let me go back and see if any questions. Is meeting with the customer before and after the engagement popular in this industry? I'm a pen tester, but I don't really talk to the customer. Other people do it for me. Yeah, that's a good one. So again, it depends on if you're in-house or out. If you're in-house or a consultant, I'll bring that question up real quick. If I'm in-house, when I was doing in-house work, I rarely talked to anybody. I would do a report, I'd send it out. Even as a consultant, we would have project managers. Some places did. I would say about half of the companies I've worked for have had project managers. So sometimes you have to be the project manager, depending on how small the organization is or how cheap they are. But that said, if you have a project manager, they do most of the talking with the customer to set it up and make sure that there is, if you have to send, if a box has to be sent for an internal, that it gets sent, and that, when the customer gets it installed and they want to talk back, or the box wants to talk back to your organization to do the pen test, as a pen tester, you have to check it and make sure it works. But the project manager is the one that communicates with the customer, says, yeah, it's working, it's not working. If there are any technical issues, the pen tester usually helps out with that. So the project manager takes a heavy load. That's their job, right? They're there to make sure that it's uh, in time, under budget, and the quality work is there, and that they're monitoring and communicating correctly to the right stakeholders. That's their job. So as a pen tester, your job is to be the engine of the car and run and do the stuff. But again, um, when you have that final report or you encounter a vulnerability, an exploitable vulnerability, and you could seriously crash the system, you got to communicate with usually an engineer. Or you say, hey, I found a critical. Now you got to talk to the manager, right? The project manager will set all that up and say, hey, we found something. But then it's your turn to say, hey, this is what I found. This is how it's exploitable. And this is why we consider it critical. And then the next question is, do you want us to pursue any further down that path? Do you actually want us to exploit it and then leverage that, pivot from that system on it? So there is communication with the customer, even in-house, right? You're going to talk to the customer. If you have a project manager or a manager that's assuming that role, then things become a lot easier. But as you go up the scale, as you move from junior to mid to senior, you're going to have that role of communicating more and more with that customer. So you may not do it now, you might be doing it in the next 10 years. So, just be ready for that. But again, in-house, if you just stay in-house, it's not going to be as dramatic as all that. Next question is, let me finish this one up first. Difference between in-house and consulting. So I touched on a majority of it, but really the big difference for me is as an in-house. When I did in-house pen testing, I had carte blanche, right? I could test anything. Basically, they said, we need to know what a hacker might find. And so we could do anything. We didn't have to ask you didn't even have to ask permission. There was a lot of reasons for that, and I don't want to get into them because the SEC was involved. So, but that's a story for another time. But we had carte blanche to be able to basically test anything, internal and external. And so we did. And then again, we would just reach out to the owner of the system and say, hey, this is your problem. And then we would send it, they'd either have to fix it or they would send it over to, they would put in a request to the policy exception team, right? In order to keep that from having to patch that for whatever reason. But that was the process, just hack stuff, right? But a consulting is a lot more restricted. We have a very tight timeline in which we need to do things. We have a scope that says you have from this date to this date, you have these IPs that you can test. You can do these things. You can't do these things. You can only come from this location. You can't do, all these controls. And so, as a consultant, we always try to convince our customers to expand on what we're allowed to do, simply because that's what a real malicious hacker would do. But you still have to follow whatever rules they want. It's not your system. It's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to do the pen test based on their needs. And so you have to work with your project manager a lot more. You have to stay within the guidelines, and those guidelines change from customer to customer. All right. And so you have to stay very acutely aware of that. And you also have to be very careful about understanding what kind of tests you're doing. If it's a compliance test, do you understand what the compliance framework actually asks you to do? Right. And did you do those things? Right. So you need to be aware of all of that. But in-house, a lot of times it's a lot more relaxed and a lot less need to communicate with people. But I will say too, is that if you're in-house, you can get stuck in an architecture and not understand anything outside of that, what you're exposed to. So you could be, in a non-cloud environment for 20 years. And if somebody comes in and says, hey, we just acquired a company and they've got cloud, we need you to pen test against that, you'll be at ground zero. You won't know anything about anything when it comes to the cloud because you have no exposure to it. If you do consulting, you're exposed to everything. I mean, everything, some crazy stuff. You like, who even told you how to implement an architecture that way? It makes no sense. But it is what it is. So let's figure that out. I've seen very flat architectures, and they're flat because that's what their culture dictates. They want it as open as possible. And then we've seen, I've been on other ones that everything is a domain, a security domain. And so they've got routers between, different business units, and they have security built around that. Fantastic, but pain in the ass to actually hack. So, I mean, you get a lot of different exposure to a lot of different things if you're doing consulting. And so, what do you want to do? You want to do the in-house stuff with, there's a real good value to that. You become subject matter expert, really well, or you want to learn everything and constantly be exposed to new things. There's benefits to both. I can't be critical of either one. I enjoyed both of them. I just found I do really well communicating with people and managers, and so I leverage that skill, and so that means I'm more of a consultant. So, all right. So let me go back to some of the questions. That was actually the last question that I had for this. So let's go ahead and do some more on the chat. Let's see. Why did you choose red team over blue team? So that was interesting. So that's actually, yeah. So I did offensive stuff in the Army, and I wouldn't necessarily call it red team. I would just call it, I don't know, doing my job as a signals intelligence analyst and Russian linguist and cryptanalyst, right? So that's what I did. But then I moved into system administration, network administration, right? And I understood how a lot of that stuff already worked. Am I still showing that slide? Hold on. Let me turn that off. Go back to this. Oh, sorry. Anyway, so I understood how systems, could be hacked, because back in the 80s, but it was easy, right? So easy. But again, a lot of times people just kept ports open or whatever. Nobody understood what security was. Spent most of the 90s in the Army. So 2000 rolls around, things are a little different, right? And system administrator and network administrator. And the question was, I'm doing patches for a system. And I'm like, what would the hacker actually do to exploit this system? And that was the end of it. That led me down, that one question that I had that one day led me down to being offensive the entire time from then on out. That was probably 2003. And it was like, I was more interested in that than putting on the patch. And then I also realized, that saying is that a hacker only has to, be right once, and a defensive system administrator, network administrator has to be right all the time, right? So it's easier to be a hero as a hacker than it was to be on the blue team side. And in addition, you don't get the recognition as much on the blue side. I'm not saying I'm in it for the ego, but I do like to have those conversations with people on how to improve their security. When I was on the system administration, network administration side, security side, it was always, well, how much does that cost? How much does that cost? How much does that cost? And that got old, right? And definitely a job that's needed. Don't get me wrong, but it's not a job that I just wanted to constantly argue against on how to best defend. When you have a hacker come in, professional pentester come in and show how the system can be exploited from the outside by anybody, then people pay attention. They don't hear the noise from their own employees. That's really dumb, right? They don't hear it from the people that they've hired to trust, the subject matter experts of their own systems. They don't trust that advice. But some rando walks in, gets paid X number of dollars for 2 weeks worth of pen testing, and it's gospel. It's kind of dumb. But it is what it is. And so that's one of the reasons why I enjoy being on the offensive side more. So there's that question. Let's see, just joined in. Perhaps you'd answer this question. How does one start out in becoming a pen tester? Yeah, I absolutely did answer that question. This should be, this will be saved. So feel free to start over when it goes live when it drops on YouTube, and feel free to watch through it. Yeah, I absolutely covered how to begin from ground zero with no experience. I'll recap real quick. Get some knowledge using VulnHub and vulnerable exploits. Work up to maybe a cert. Start working on, when you're good enough, do some create some tools, do some bug bounty stuff, and just keep working it. It's not a quick process by any means, but there is a path to do that. Again, go back and check it out. Let's see. Yeah, first pen testing job. Okay, cool. Okay, I'll give you guys a few more seconds to throw any more questions in. I know there's a bit of a delay, but other than that, we'll wrap it up. It's been an hour. I don't want to necessarily cut it off just because it's been an hour. I don't really care about that. I'm one of those guys that's long-winded. So if you have questions, by all means, check it out. Send them on. But again, we've only got. I'm only going to wait for a couple more minutes. Let me make sure I've covered everything. Q&A, career, certs, hired, realistic, salaries. Yeah, I think I kind of covered it all. I really appreciate everybody that came to this. And again, I'll probably do a lot more of these. So if you have any Q&As that you'd like me to cover besides career, I can do another career one as well. But there's going to be other ones like, how do you become a web app pen tester or a network pen tester, or what kind of tools should I use? There's a lot of Q&A stuff that I get questions on, but I'd rather hear from you guys on what you're interested in, because it's hit or miss, and I don't want to drag it out and say like, maybe I'll answer your question 3 months from now, because it will just come around to that point. If you have a question, hit me up. I'm more than happy to chat about it. Also, make sure you check out our Discord server. I'm pointing places that nothing's going to pop up, but yeah, definitely check out the Discord server. I've set that up for people who are learning how to do pen testing and are already on their path to become professional pen testers. And I've got a lot of peers and friends who are veterans and have been doing this a while, who have joined the Discord server as well. So a lot of expertise that's available. So swing over to the Discord. By all means, ask questions, start things. Again, the idea is people are new there. Ask new questions. I'm totally fine with it. There's nothing to be embarrassed about if you don't understand something. And I'm happy to help you out. Everybody there is happy to help you out. I'm trying to keep it a very positive environment, and the people have been fantastic that have contributed to it. So check it out. And if you have any questions at the end of this, feel free to put them down in the comment section too. And then that will help me better define what the next Q&A should be. If it should be another career one or something else. And I think that's it. I don't see any more questions. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Again, thanks for joining. Really glad you guys decided to come along. Other than that, I'll see you next time.